All right, welcome to the latest edition of the College Football Pack. I'm your host, Patrick Kahn, senior editor of the College Wires. With me, as always, Tyler Natuno of LSU Tigers Wire and For the Win. We didn't get a chance to talk about this last week. It's probably old news by now, but we're going to get into some college football playoff discussion. We had some scheduling issues last week. We're back on it this week, though. CFP discussion, Florida State, we're going to talk about it. I put our opinions on it. Obviously, the Heisman, upcoming bowl games, coaching carousel, plenty to get to. And, we might even get into some college basketball discussion where it's all said and done because, while we do focus on football, there is that whole, the hardwood stuff is going on currently. But let's kick this off with the college football playoff discussion. Right now, we have Alabama taking on number one Michigan in the Rose Bowl. That's an interesting trip. We'll get to see really two good defenses. I would have to say Alabama's got the much better offense. When you look at how Jalen Milroe has been this year, and then obviously out the other game out in the Sugar Bowl out in New Orleans, the Big Easy. We have a rematch of last year's Bolero Alamo Bowl. Washington, he's going up against the Texas Longhorns. That's going to be an interesting matchup as well. So Tyler, just real quick, looking at the two games, which game are you more excited for, Rose Bowl or the Sugar Bowl down in New Orleans?
Yes, I mean, look, first of all, I think this is a really good field. I think it's maybe the best 4-team field we've had in the decade that this thing has existed. I think, I look at both these games and I think they're both really kind of intriguing in their own ways. I think the game I'd probably give the edge to right now is I think Texas and Washington in the Sugar Bowl, just because I think that one's the one that's, I think a little bit more, I don't know what to make of that matchup. I think that, obviously Washington's offense, very explosive in the passing game. But Texas defensively is really, really sturdy, like especially their defensive line and the interior of that defensive line in particular. They're really good at stopping the run. That's been kind of their strength all year. We saw them do it in the Big 12 championship against Ollie Gordon. And, that's just a strength they have. So what I'm really wondering about that game, first and foremost, is, can Texas's defense make Washington get one-dimensional in its offensive game? Obviously Michael Penix and those receivers, very capable. But, I think they're at their best when they are able to run the ball well. We've seen that, the way they played against USC in particular was the best example of it. But that's really when they've been at their best this year, they've been able to run the ball. So that, I think, is the interesting part of that game to me. And looking at the other one too, I mean, again, like you kind of said, both teams really solid defensively. I think that the question for Alabama, I think, is, you look at the way Michigan played against Ohio State, Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr., the skill position guys they have, they did a really good job. So it really makes me wonder if they're going to be able to shut those guys down, like Isaiah Bond and Jermaine Burton, if they can shut those guys down and really make Jalen Milroe sort of have to do it all himself, kind of play hero ball as he has at times this year. He's a really electric player, but that's asking a lot. I guess my biggest question, though, in that game is Michigan's offense, because I think it's pretty clear, J.J. McCarthy hasn't been asked to do a lot in these games. He hasn't really had to go win a game for Michigan. And I think if their plan is to go into this game, if they're able to go into this game and just run Blake Corum into a brick wall over and over again and win that way, then like the committee got it wrong with Alabama being in, because that's kind of the whole value prop there, is that you're not going to be able to do that. JJ McCarthy, I think, is going to have to go win this game through the air, doing some things he hasn't done this year. And that is really interesting.
I think the big story in terms of the Rose Bowl is what can Mike Sanders still do on the outside? Because, Jermaine Burton is kind of a guy who was quiet early on, and then he started to see him pick it up, much like the rest of the team. If he can kind of take some options away for Jalen Milroe, maybe force him to run around a little more, that play into the hands of Michigan. So I think really, especially the boundary, that's where this game will be won or lost for Michigan. I think offensively they can do enough. I mean, we saw what a team without an offense in Auburn was able to do against Alabama just a few weeks ago. But really, when you look at Alabama, might not be a hotter team in college football right now, while They have that one loss to Texas. Since that loss, they went on a string of 11 straight wins, including beating Georgia, which was a tough game for Georgia, but ultimately they were able to hold on in that game. So for me, I think it's going to boil down to the outside and Mike Sanders still, who has 2 pick-sixes this year, 5 interceptions. He's shown the ability to be a ball hawk, and that's not surprising considering he's a converted wide receiver. Over on the Texas side, yeah, I like what you're bringing up about Devondre, Byron Murphy, and those guys on the inside. My big thing in this game, like you said, slowing down Dylan Johnson, who had a really strong game against Oregon. He had the 150 yards. I think 150 might have been a little bit less than that. The 2 rushing touchdowns. He also had a receiving touchdown. Yeah, slowing him down will be key. But what I'm really interested to see is if Xavier Worthy is healthy, how impactful he can be on the outside, along with O'Donnell Mitchell, along with Jordan Whittington. But how do the running backs perform? They have Keelan Robinson, the former Alabama transfer. They have C.J. Baxter, who was a 5-star signee last year. They have Jaden Blue. They have some guys mix it up, run the football. So I'm really interested to see how Texas does running the football because while they haven't had a lot of issues since Jonathan Brooks gone down, you can still tell that they do miss him in the backfield. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see how that all plays out. And ultimately, I think this is going to boil down to which special teams plays better because, as we know, Texas has had the ability to impact the game through returns. Can they set Texas up in some favorable situations on offense? But before we get into the Florida State discussion, Tyler, I just want to know, as of right now, who do you have playing in the national championship game in Houston, Texas on January the 8th?
Yeah, so I have kind of conflicted opinions about this whole thing because as we'll get into, I kind of have some issues with Alabama being in this field in the first place. But with that being said, I do think I trust them a little bit more to beat this Michigan team. I think they're more well-rounded. I just, there's Michigan could totally win this game. I mean, they are, I think, have been the more consistently competitive, or the more consistently dominant team this year than Alabama, I should say. I just don't know. We just haven't seen JJ McCarthy put in that situation. And Jalen Milroe has, for better or worse, he's had his issues this year, but he has been put in that situation multiple times. He's battle tested. So, I think that, that's how I kind of look at that game. I lean a little bit towards Alabama, but I think looking at the other game, this one's a lot harder for me to predict. I think, like you said, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think this is one that's going to kind of come down to, a few different a few small plays here and there, maybe a special teams big play. Because I think both these offenses are going to be able to score in this game. I think I lean a little bit towards Texas, though, for the same reason, though. I think I just feel like they're a little bit more a complete team. I kind of trust their defense more to get those key stops in this game. And, if I had to, maybe I'll reevaluate in the next couple of weeks. But if I had to make my pick right now, I think I'd say we see an Alabama-Texas rematch in the national championship.
Yeah, I think the Alabama-Texas rematch is the likely scenario when you look at these two matchups. I like Alabama more. I just think when you look at what Jalen Milroe can do, creating, throwing the ball downfield, running the football, it's really going to give that Michigan defense a huge test. And really, up until they played Ohio State, we really hadn't seen them tested. But I do like the Alabama offense a little more as what we've seen this season, running the football and the ability to create. And then you look over at the Texas Washington game. I think that could be as much of a coin flip if you really look two matchups. However, I lean a little bit towards Texas just because I feel like their defense can create a little bit better in terms of stopping the run, forcing teams to be one-dimensional, and then taking away those opportunities. But don't get me wrong, this Texas secondary will get tested with Jalen Polk, with Rome Odunze. They will get absolutely tested, but ultimately, I probably lean Texas here to get that rematch for the national championship, which would be quite humorous for that to be the way that Texas is introduced to the SEC, given the fact that will have to be playing teams like Alabama move forward as they head into the SEC next season. As far as the Florida State discussion, Tyler, we haven't really gotten into this. Just kind of curious what your take was as you were watching Selection Sunday, as we watched that disheartening uh, live shot of the Florida State team as they learned that they would be going to the Orange Bowl to face off Georgia instead of the college football playoff.
Yeah, a couple thoughts here. I mean, like, first of all, I realize I'm kind of about to talk out of both sides of my mouth a bit because I just picked Alabama to not only beat the number one team in the country, but like they might be my pick to win it all this year. So I realize that, it sounds a little bit counterintuitive for me to say that and then say I don't really think they deserve to be here, but that's how I feel because I think that I just, from a process perspective, I just don't like it. I don't like the precedent it sets. I don't like the idea of an undefeated Power 5 team getting left out, of an undefeated Power 5 conference champion getting left out in favor of a non-undefeated Power 5 conference champion. Like, we've never had this situation before. And I don't know, all this whole thing about best team versus most deserving team, like, that kind of seems like a red herring a little bit to me. Like that we've never had this sort of debate before. I mean, like, did anyone in their right mind in 2021 think that Cincinnati was one of the top 4 teams in the country? I don't think anyone believed that. No one believed that they did. They believed they deserved to be there. And that's why they got there. I don't think we've ever adjudicated this based on this most deserving versus best dichotomy. Like that to me is an invention of this season. And it's kind of a post hoc justification for not wanting to put this Florida State team in that admittedly isn't that good right now. Like I'll fully say that they, very easily could have lost to a bad Florida team. They could have lost to a bad Louisville team that doesn't look great right now. I don't think anyone believes that you put this Florida State team in that field and they win against any of those other 3 teams. But I just don't like that they're not getting the opportunity to. Like, we've had wrong opinions before. I think they should have the chance to prove, that they're, chance to prove that, the committee's opinion there is wrong. And when you look at Alabama, like, are we forgetting that this is the same Alabama team that, only beat a bad Arkansas team by 3 points, 1-score game against Texas A&M, needed an absolute miracle to beat an Auburn team in the Iron Bowl that had lost, in blowout fashion against New Mexico State the week before. Like, it's not like this Alabama team has just rolled through everyone since they lost to Texas. Like, I just don't know. I don't like it. And to me, the biggest takeaway from all this, like, more than anything, because like there's no real precedent that's actually going to come from this, right? Like, the situation is never going to happen again because an undefeated Power 5 conference champion is guaranteed a spot now. So to me, I mean, the biggest, effect this is going to have kind of downstream in college football is this is just DEFCON 1 for the ACC. I mean, if it wasn't clear already that the ACC is, not at the same level of the other power conferences, I mean, it's obvious now. Obviously, if you're Florida State, you feel that way. But I mean, also, if you're Clemson, if you're Miami, if you're anyone else in this league that has championship aspirations, you got to start thinking of a way to get out of it. You got to find a way to get out of here because it's pretty clear that, look, I mean, Cincinnati got in as an undefeated G5 champion. You're being viewed lower than the American Conference was viewed a few years ago. So, I mean, this is a really bad situation for the ACC.
I think when you look at the top, I mean, it was going to be a tough decision regardless of who was in, who was out. But let's be honest, this was a business decision. And you look at which 4 teams provide the best playoff experience, which teams are best, which teams are going to bring in money, because we all know the college football is a money league. With that being said, I accurately picked the 4 teams, and I accurately picked them in the order they would go in terms of Michigan, Washington, Texas, Alabama. I knew they weren't going to leave the SEC out. Totally understand it. With that being said, was it a gut punch to Florida State for not getting selected? Yes. Did Michigan was Michigan upset the fact that they drew Alabama and not Florida? Absolutely, because I think Alabama is the one team that's built to beat them. Just the way that they play, and just the way that Saban runs his program. That being said, I would like to have seen a little bit of, being a little more uniform when you look at the college playoff committee. The reason why that they didn't choose Florida State was because of how they looked on the field. That being said, as many wins against top 25 teams, why didn't they have the same mentality when it came to picking Liberty over SMU for that G spot? They rewarded the Flames for continuing to win despite not being that impressive and having the weakest schedule of any team in FBS. Whereas you look at SMU, who played top 25 teams, that played Power 5 opponents when you talk about TCU, when you talk about Oklahoma. And let's not forget that SMU Oklahoma game. SMU gave Oklahoma everything that they could handle and more. And then ultimately, the talent rise to the top, and Oklahoma was able to win that football game. But to me, I look at that and I'm like, SMU was more deserving of that spot, but that's not the way they went. So it's like the school of thought for Florida to apply to anybody else. And that's all I want. Uniformity, be consistent with how you were selecting these teams. If it wasn't good enough for Florida State, it shouldn't have been good enough for Liberty.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about Liberty, because I think it just further illustrates that the whole best teams thing is a misdirection. It's a misdirection because they didn't want to put a Florida State team in that they thought would get embarrassed, and maybe they would have. But I mean, I don't know. Like you see the frame behind me if you're watching on video. I have no love lost for the Florida State Seminoles, but I just and like I've already said, I think the result that this gave us was maybe the best 4-team field we've seen in the entire CFP era. So like, a lot of conflicting opinions or feelings for me on this one right now, but I just don't love it. I think it is antithetical to the spirit of the sport. When you win every game in front of you, these schedules are set years in advance. It's not like FSU knew how bad of a year it was going to be in the ACC, and they still played 2 SEC teams out of conference. Like, I don't know. I don't like it.
Well, if there was any way for the 4-team playoff to go out in a blaze of dumpster fire, this might have been the year. We're going to 12 teams next year. We're still not exactly sure how it's going to happen with the format. There's supposed to Power 5 conferences and a group of 5 with automatic bids. Don't really know with the Pac-12. Does that mean that Oregon State or Washington State get an automatic bid in? I don't, and we'll get into that as we get closer to the season and obviously moving forward. But let's talk about who probably got it right, and that's the Heisman voters. Jaden Daniels walked away with the Heisman Trophy. There were some people out on the social media networks and Facebook who maybe thought that he wasn't as deserving because, the team around him wasn't very good when you look at the defense. And, I think that is actually argument for why he should have been the Heisman winner. Would you look at the stats that he put up, what he had to overcome? Because if I take Jaden Daniels off the LSU Tigers, how good are they? 6-6, 5-7, 4-8. He overcame a lot. To me, it was the right way to do it because I didn't want to see another Heisman winner get the award just because he was playing for a team that was contending for a national championship. A few weeks ago, prior to the Alabama game, Jaden Daniels was in contention to lead them right back to the SEC championship.
Yep, I mean, completely agree. I think they got this absolutely right. I think that with Jaden Daniels, it really was. I was pretty confident the whole time that he was going to win it. The only thing that kind of shook it for me was the night before when Michael Penix won the Maxwell, because those, they're for the same thing. It's the most outstanding player in the country. They haven't deviated since 2018. This was the first year since 2018 they ultimately deviated, obviously, as Jaden Daniels wins the Heisman. And truthfully, just being on, if you go on Twitter, you would think this was like some, mega controversy. I really don't get it. I don't understand what's so controversial about it. Not to discount the season Michael Penix had. It was a really good season, but they just were not even on the same plane in terms of production. Penix led the nation in passing yards, so that's kind of where he edged Daniels and Bo Nix out there. But Jaden Daniels leads the nation in total yards per game, was an 1,100-yard rusher this year, leads the nation in total touchdowns with 50, only threw 4 interceptions. Set an FBS record for passing efficiency. He led the nation in pretty much every stat for quarterbacks. Truthfully, I think Bo Nix would have had a good argument if he had played a little bit better and they were able to win that game in the Pac-12 championship. Honestly, I'm not a Heisman voter. If I was, I might have put Bo Nix second on my ballot. I'm not even sure I'm 100% convinced that Michael Penix should have been the second choice there. So, I think that's definitely a debate for sure. But, bottom line here is I think clearly the most deserving player won it. If you want to look at the losses, first of all, this is not cherry picking. There's plenty of examples of 3-loss teams, their quarterback or having a player win the Heisman. And, in those losses, Jaden Daniels, the offense put up 24, 49, and 28. So it's not like they got shut down in those games, certainly lost because of, the defensive effort in those games. So, to me, it wasn't really a debate. They got it absolutely right. I think it would have been a travesty if anyone other than Jaden Daniels had won it, but he did.
I agree with you 100%. I actually think that Bo Nix was my number 2 guy. If I had a ballot and I don't have a vote like you. So when I was like, absolutely, Bo Nix is number 2. And I think perhaps he didn't get that second spot because of 2 losses, as Michael Penix Jr. in Washington, which I totally get. I can understand the mentality behind that, but ultimately I think they got it right going with Jaden Daniels. Hey, but let's talk about something we haven't talked about in a little bit. Let's talk about the coaching carousel. Almost all of the open jobs have been filled with the exception of Troy because John Summerall just took the job at Tulane. Had a lot of movement. So just out of curiosity, I'm going to let you kick this off. Who do you think was the best hire of the carousel season so far?
Yeah, for me, it's Willie Fritz at Tulane. Willie Fritz at Houston. I love this hire. I think this is an awesome hire for Houston. I think they get exactly what they need. I think they needed a program builder, and that's exactly what they get with Willie Fritz. I think, we've talked about, I know I have on this show a lot about, the potential with that Houston job, the resources, the location, all that now being in the Big 12. But I think there is a bit of a logical fallacy going on there. And Houston's not the only program we do it with. Just because resources exist and are there and available doesn't mean that, you can take advantage of them and turn it into a successful product. So, what Houston really needs right now is someone who can come in and do just that. And I think that's what they get with Willie Fritz. A guy who he's not coming from the state of Texas, but has plenty of ties to the state of Texas, has college coaching experience there, has high school coaching experience, even was a JUCO head coach in the state of Texas for a while. So, a guy that's been around the block, knows the area, knows all levels of football in the area. And that's something that's so important, being a coach in the state of Texas. If you watched Mike Elko's introductory press conference at A&M, he made a big point. That was one of the first things he talked about, was the importance of networking and making those connections with the high school coaches. So having a guy that's been in that, arena before is going to make a big difference. I think they just, it really makes a lot of sense. And I think, you get a guy who has been successful everywhere he's been, raised the ceiling at Tulane considerably. And now I think he's going to come in and raise the floor a lot for Houston in a new Big 12 that doesn't really have like a clear hegemony. Like, I think that, it's kind of a power vacuum going on. So, a team like Houston with the right hire could totally step into that. And I think that's exactly what they got.
Yeah, I really like this hire, and I'd be interested to see if Pratt decides to head over to Houston and follow Willie Fritz. Should he not go to the NFL, that would be an in move for me, just to see. But I really like the move. I like the hire by Fritz. I think is tremendous and well-deserving, gets his shot in the power. We've seen what he could do at Tulane the last several years. Including that victory in the Cotton Bowl over USC. So he can get up for games, and I think Houston, they need a little bump. The Dana Holgerson thing just felt like it was just a matter of time, and that's what happened. They moved on, despite the fact that he made the comment prior to his firing that he has a contract. So he'll be back next year. And I'm like, I don't think you understand what that means. But for me, I'm going to go to Indiana, and a guy who's brought some major energy, already claiming that they're going to be in the Big Ten title game next year. We're talking about Kurt Kignetti leaving James Madison after the job that he did made them one of the national stories of the year. Now he's going to take over in Indiana, which I think is great. Interesting enough, Kignetti, this is his first Power 5 opportunity as a head coach. But not somebody who is not familiar with the Power 5. He was one of the assistants on that 2009 Alabama team that won that national championship. He was a recruiting coordinator and receivers coach on that same staff that also had Bo Davis, who's now at Texas, Jim McElwain, your former head coach. You know a little bit about him, and Kirby Smart. So he's been around some of the top names in the industry, and obviously I think this will be a good thing for Indiana. Still a little bit surprised that they actually pulled the trigger on fire on that $20 million buyout. But I don't know that there was a better hire for me, pound for pound, than taking Kurt Cignetti after the job he did with the Duke and sticking him in with the Hoosiers.
Yeah, this was a great pick too. I think that Indiana is really trying to tell us that they're serious. We'll see if they actually are. We'll see how that sort of bears fruit down the line. But I mean, that's how they're acting. Firing Tom Allen, that was a big buyout. They negotiated it down to it was over 20 million. They negotiated it down to about 15 million. So that's a nice first step. And then you go and hire Kurt Cignetti, who's been one of the best coaches in the G5 over the last couple seasons. A guy that doesn't really have Indiana or Big Ten ties, but he spent the last couple years first at James Madison in Virginia. Prior to that was at Elon in North Carolina. But he's from Pittsburgh. Has played football at West Virginia, so he's kind of got some, I guess, Midwest Rust Belt-ish ties. So there's kind of, I guess, a bit of a connection there. But I think ultimately they're just getting a really good football coach here. A guy that has built multiple programs, is coming into a job that is hard. It needs a guy that can develop talent, because you're not going to just land elite talent at Indiana. And so, I'm curious, you're no longer in the Big Ten East. You don't have to deal with playing, the likes of Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan State every single year. Schedule's going to get a little bit nicer to you, at least. And, I'm just curious, if this team is actually putting money into football, putting resources into football, trying to win, I'm curious what they can do with a guy like Kurt Cignetti, who is, if nothing else, a proven winner.
Yes, he is. I mean, you look at the 52-9 mark in the 5 years there at James Madison. He was 14-9 at Elon, and before that at IUP, 53-17. A guy who's never suffered a losing season as a head coach. It'll be interesting if he's going to put that to a test this week or this coming season with Indiana. But that was a great hire. For me, the best hire of the cycle. Now, if we're talking about rated hires of the cycle, I'm going to go with Bronco Mendenhall at New Mexico, a guy who really showed his coaching chops when he was with Brigham Young for all those years, multiple 11-win seasons, multiple 10 or more win seasons. It never really seemed to work for him at Virginia, but I think with the expectations being lowered at New Mexico, I have to say between him and Jerry Kill, a lot of good football is going to be played in the state of New Mexico in the next several years.
Yeah, this is a really good hire. I think, obviously Bronco took the last couple of years off, left Virginia, kind of, took some personal time after that. But actually, he took them to an Orange Bowl in 2019 that they lost to Florida. I was at that game. But yeah, so, I think that, I think you're landing a guy that's an overachiever. He was very consistent at BYU. He took Virginia to heights they hadn't really seen, coming off the Mike London era. And I think they miss him. They've definitely had their share of struggles in the last couple of years without him. So I really like this move for New Mexico. Obviously, regionally, it makes a lot of sense. A guy with kind of ties to that mountain region area. I think he was also, from what I've heard, a candidate at Boise State too. They ended up promoting from within. But I think that he wants back in the game, and this is a program that's kind of going to give him free range to build in his own image. It's a hard job. It's not an easy job at all. One of the worst jobs in the Mountain West. New Mexico is just in general not, college football central, but, you're seeing the success that New Mexico State's having with Jerry Kill, like you mentioned. There's obviously potential here. And I think in Bronco, you get a clear upgrade over Danny Gonzalez, who, nothing against him personally. I just think he was always a little bit in over his head in this job, because it's just a really hard job.
Yeah, and Bronco going back to the Mountain West, where he won the 2006 Mountain West Coach of the Year for that 11-2 season with BYU. Yeah, I think it's a great hire. One that maybe people are, kind of forgot about. And and first when I heard his name thrown about, I'm like, I don't know that he's ready to get back into football, but clearly he is. And so when I look at this hire, I think it's great. I think that I would not, if you were to tell me next year New Mexico is going to finish with at least 6 wins, I would not be shocked, because that's how confident I am that Bronco Mendenhall will do a good job out there with the Lobos.
Yeah, it surely seems like a home run hire for that program that is just looking for something to grab onto. For me, I'm sticking kind of on the West Coast with my underrated hire. a guy that I feel like also just sort of went under the radar a little bit, it's Sean Lewis at San Diego State. I think this is an awesome hire. I really like the vision here. I think, with Sean Lewis, I mean, first of all, let's just address it. Disregard that whole fiasco at Colorado this year. I don't really know what that was about. I mean, he was making the most of that offense. He was doing the best he could with an offensive line that couldn't block anything. So, I think that demotion really made no sense. And I think it was pretty obvious that the industry felt the same way about it with the way he was viewed. If he hadn't taken this job, I can almost guarantee you Sean Lewis would be a high-level Power 5 offensive coordinator right now. But instead, he's taken the head coaching rank, going back to the head coaching ranks, I should say, at San Diego State, and it's interesting 180 for the program, the very defensive identity under the last two coaches and Rocky Long and Brady Hoke. Really going back to or not even going back, just completely reversing course here with an offensive hire that I think is a really good fit for the identity this program's trying to build. You've got a new stadium, you're in Southern California, and now you've got a guy who's going to be able to go appeal to some of those talented West Coast skill position players. So I really like this hire. I like the vision here, and I think that I'm just kind of curious what he can do. I think it's worked out really well for him, even with the setback at Colorado. I think it's hard to argue this didn't work out perfectly. I mean, the whole reason he took that job in the first place was because despite having success at a really hard place in Kent State, he was kind of getting boxed out for jobs like this. He was kind of stuck there. So, half a season calling plays at Colorado was all it took for him to get a really good opportunity like this.
I also thought it was interesting that Danny O'Neil decommitted from Colorado to follow Sean Lewis to San Diego State. So it'll be interesting to see how the Cathedral quarterback does 2024 commit. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly he gets out there. But I just thought it was interesting. His primary recruiter at Colorado was Lewis, so not shocked at all to see that he has flipped. Let's talk about an hire that a little bit intriguing, maybe a little bit of a head scratcher. And I'm certain you want to start up in the Northeast with a particular hire that might have come out of left field for some.
Yeah, man, if you're not paying attention to what Fran Brown is doing up at Syracuse, I would maybe keep an eye on it, so kind of a weird hire. Like it really came out of left field, sounded like they were considering, Dan Mullen potentially, maybe Jason Candle from Toledo, or even Sean Lewis, who was originally an OC at Syracuse. But they end up kind of going with a hire that, like you said, pretty kind of came out of left field. They hire Fran Brown, who was Georgia's defensive backs coach, ranked as the top recruiter in the nation this past season. So elite recruiting from Fran Brown. And he's built a staff that, I mean, if nothing else, that is what they're going to do. They are going to grind recruiting. Elijah Robinson, the defensive line coach at Texas A&M, was the interim coach there when they fired Jimbo Fisher. They really wanted to keep him around on Mike Elko's new staff, but he's not sticking around. He's heading up to Syracuse to be the defensive coordinator there. So they land, another elite recruiter in Elijah Robinson. They've pulled at least 3, I think, assistants away from NFL teams to be position coaches there, and one to be an offensive coordinator, actually. So he's building a really impressive staff, and, the early returns, pretty interesting. They've gotten a couple flips from Power 5 teams. They've got a transfer from Georgia. I'm really curious. This is a hard job. It's maybe the hardest job in the ACC. It's hard to convince players to come to Syracuse, come up to Central New York. But I got to give this program credit. They think outside the box. The Dino Babers hire, they kind of were like, okay, what if we hire an air raid coach, try to bring that offense in here? It didn't really work out. They couldn't get those skill position guys. Like, okay, well, now what if we focus on the recruiting element and just build a staff full of elite recruiters? Will it work? I have no idea, but it's fascinating, and I think it's worth paying attention to.
Not only brought up Jackson Meeks, transferring from Georgia, they also got a Georgia area tight end, forced Jamie Tremble in their class, who's a commit. I think he's to be a big target for them. Yeah, you have to like it. I mean, it's interesting. It's a little bit of a head scratcher if you're not familiar with him. But tremendous hire, and like you said, the assistants that he's bringing in, Elijah Robinson, a fantastic recruiter. I mean, he's shown his recruiting chops. That is really interesting to me. I would tell you the one that kind of caught me off guard a little bit, but I love Bob Chesney going from Holy Cross over to James Madison. I think this is going to be a really good hire for them. I think that he can get a lot out of his team. He's And honestly, I don't know if there's a better guy to replace Signetti than going with Bob Chesney.
Yeah, also agree. This James Madison program just really seems to, have its head on straight. I mean, it's easy to forget a couple years ago when they won the FCS national title, their coach, Mike Houston, dips for East Carolina, where he's still there a little bit tenuously, but he is still there. They replaced him with Kurt Signetti, who did great. And now I think they've made another really good replacement hire in Chesney, a guy who, sort of a rising star in the FCS ranks, coming from Holy Cross. I think one thing worth noting with Chesney is, there were a lot of rumors that had, Jeff Hafley been let go at Boston College this year, that he would have been a prime target for Boston College. So landing a guy that, could have, easily, if things have broke a little bit differently, maybe been a Power 5 coach, that's a really, really solid hire. So, I think James Madison, they've been the best team in the Sun Belt the last 2 years, haven't been eligible to win it. They will be in 24. And I think this program could be poised to truly be the best, at least one of the best programs in the G whatever.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you talk about a guy in Chesney who's got multiple accolades as far as FCS Coach of the Year, multi-time FCS Coach of the Year from the Gridiron Club. I mean, you look at just what he was able to do at Holy Cross. He hadn't been able to get over that hump, get him any further than the D1 quarterfinal playoffs. But ultimately, I think when you look at what he can do, you have to like the pattern that James Madison is in, and to get a guy that is well thought of, that is highly respected, to replace Signetti. There's going to be opportunity for him to show, and it won't surprise me if this is just another stepping stone for him as he climbs the ladder of college football. Really good hire. It's intriguing. I'm not real sure how well it's going to work out, but I am interested to see how the Dukes look under Chesney over the next several seasons. All right, let's talk about some bowl games that will be going on this Saturday. This is the early bowl, so not the big time matchup. There's a couple intriguing ones here. Hey, I'm going to go full homer. You see the Texas Tech flag here. I'm going to go with Independence Bowl, Texas Tech versus Cal, a matchup between Big 12 and Pac 12, soon to be ACC. Still not sure why. Or that still doesn't fit right, saying it's an ACC team going into next year. But I'm really interested to see how Texas Tech looks. Baron Morton has really not been healthy this year, so I'm hoping that with the time get to see a finally healthy Texas Tech quarterback. He's likely going to be the guy heading into next year with Tyler Shug now on Louisville. So what can Baron Morton show? What can this Texas Tech team show as they get ready to go into next year? Is probably one of the teams that people are going to keep an eye on in the new look Big 12. Now that Texas and Oklahoma are on their way out, you also have Utah coming in, Colorado coming in, and the two Arizonas. And we'll talk more about them in the future dates. But for me, if you're looking for one of the games that I'm absolutely going to watch, 8:15 from Shreveport, Louisiana, Texas Tech and Cal.
Yeah, two teams here, same record at 6-6, but the vibes I'd say are pretty different. I think kind of a disappointing year too for Joey McGuire at Texas Tech. Not a bad year by any stretch, but I think they kind of left a bit to be desired. Obviously, like you said, a lot of injuries at quarterback, so that's a tough thing to manage. But I'm curious. There's still reason for optimism. For the time being, Micah Hudson is still committed, the 5-star receiver. Couple days left for that to change, but looking pretty good for now. So yeah,
he's
a lot of reasons.
Tyler.
He's locked in. They did a mock signing day, so that's as good as an actual signature. But no. So I mean, we're good. Look, still reason to be optimistic. And I think this is a good opportunity against a Cal team that also 6-6, but feels a lot different. I think a team that looked like it was heading for a pretty bad year ends the year on a 3-game win streak, including kind of a beatdown against UCLA. To get to bowl eligibility, Justin Wilcox, a guy that I had on my hot seat list coming into the year. I really didn't know what to make of where this program was heading. It really seemed like they, didn't have an identity, didn't have the institutional support. I was like, this could be going bad, but they had a good season. I mean, a really solid season, all things considered, in a very competitive Pac-12. To be bowling in this league, that's an impressive achievement. So I'm kind of curious, which of these teams is able to grab the momentum going into the offseason. I think a lot of reasons to be optimistic for both. I think Cal, you're coming into an ACC that really doesn't have much to hang its hat on beyond the top couple teams. Where you fit into that league, who knows? But it could be promising. And then Texas Tech, that again, things are clearing out in the Big 12. This team's recruiting well. They've got a coaching staff that has great connections in the state of Texas. Like, there's reasons to think this could be one of the more successful teams in the new Big 12. I kind of am curious, which team's able to springboard that with this game.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's interesting if you look at this matchup, from a Cal perspective, the two quarterback out of starts for this team this year, both in the transfer portal. So they're going to be going with a redshirt freshman. So, Bentley is in the portal, Sam Jackson's in the portal. So I'm not real sure where to look and how this is going to look, and who is going to play. I like the running back matchup in this game. If you talk about Jaden Ott, who's among the top 15 players in the country. Taj Brooks, who's announced that he will return for a fifth year at Texas Tech, was fourth in the country in rushing. So really good running back matchup. But I think the LA Bowl has a little something if you're looking for an important ball game to watch on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, so with all these bowl games, like, it's really hard to know what kind of a football matchup we're going to get, because you've got opt-outs, you've got portal guys, not with the team, you've got, competing motivations. As you'll see, looking at the Orange Bowl, I don't think either of those teams wants to be there. So, it's kind of hard to gauge with some of these games. So to me, I'm not as much looking at matchups just because we don't know. I'm kind of more just interested in narratives. And this is an interesting narrative game to me, I think. Two of the teams that I think have had among the weirder seasons in college football this year. Boise starts 4-5. They fire Andy Avalos. And then, interim coach Spencer Danielson, all of a sudden, they win 4 games win 4 in a row down the stretch. They win the Mountain West. They're 8-5, playing for their 9th win here. And Spencer Danielson, by the way, did get promoted to the full-time job, so he's sticking around here. So really a nice chance to go into 2024 with some real momentum on your side if you can beat a Pac-12 team that has had its own strange season. Started off pretty well, very good defense. Couldn't quite figure out the quarterback situation. Dante Moore had his true freshman struggles. Ethan Garber's played some too. Just, kind of some inconsistency on that side of the ball. There was a report that Chip Kelly was, about to get fired, and then they go out and, beat USC pretty convincingly. And it's like, well, I guess Chip Kelly's not getting fired. And then the next week they get blown out by Cal, and it's like, well, is he? But he doesn't. He's sticking around. So, I mean, again, just kind of two teams that, sort of had disappointing years, but also in some ways were had some, moments that were high. So I don't know what to make of either of these two teams. I'm kind of curious, where the motivation's at, for a coach in Chip Kelly, who maybe is going to be under pressure next year, versus a coach in Spencer Danielson, who's kind of just getting into that honeymoon period.
Yeah, he talked about players that will be missed. Obviously, Dante Moore Jr. is in the transfer portal. He's looking at potentially going to Oregon, even though they got a quarterback. There's been some talk about Michigan going back to his home state where he played in Detroit in high school. That's going to be something to watch. Unfortunately, if you're a UCLA fan and you like defense, your top player, Latu, not going to be playing as he is for the NFL draft. Likely a top 10 pick. The quarterback situation, Ethan Garbers, Colin Schlee, not real sure which way that's going to go. But I agree. I mean, who's got the better matchup? And let's not forget Boise State's quarterback that just helped them win the Mountain West Championship. He's gone. He's already committed to Arkansas. They're going to be going with a true freshman quarterback, so it'll be really interesting. I think the guy's thrown 10 passes, if that, all year. Yeah. So it's a tough one. It's a tough for, but still, it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. Right now, momentum-wise, I feel like Boise's got the momentum.
Yeah, and that's, to me, these games are all about the narrative and the momentum, because you just pointed out, I don't know how I'm supposed to evaluate, this UCLA front seven without its best player against a Boise team without its starting quarterback. I don't know. I'm not pretending to be an expert in that regard. So I think with all these games, you just never really know what you're going to get in terms of on-field performance and motivation and all that. So it's just interesting. I think there's just a lot to be learned from these bowl games, more than it is I'm fascinated to see this football game.
Yeah, I will say with these bowl games, the one great thing is these young kids who don't normally get much playing time. They get more practices, they get more opportunities to play, which is good for them, and I'm happy to hear about that. All right, so let's talk about the NFL draft coming up. Let's talk about the number one pick and who we got. And obviously, when you look at who's going to be picking number one, uh, unless they go on a run, the Carolina Panthers would hold that number one pick. Oh wait, they traded that pick away to Chicago. Chicago sitting there also in the top five if you look at the latest projections to pick at number five. So they have two top five picks. It'll be interesting to see if they stick and pick at number one or trade down and get some more future picks. But right now, if you were going to make a selection at number one, despite the fact that they built, I'm probably going to lean Caleb Williams at number one. And I know Tyler does not agree with me.
Yeah, I don't want to be I don't want to be the anti Caleb Williams guy because I'm not. I like Caleb Williams. I think there's a lot to like there. In terms of like his NFL skill set. I think, again, if I'm picking first overall, and it's like I said, looking like it's probably going to be the Bears because the Carolina Panthers are awful and also don't have that pick. So that was really good decision making on their part, working out really well right now. But yeah, I mean, obviously Fields kind of playing well. I mean, I'm not an NFL expert, so I don't, we'll see if he's able to, do enough down the stretch with this team to convince them to give him another year as the starter. But I'd say right now, if you're picking first overall in this quarterback class, you're probably taking a quarterback. Again, while I like a lot of the things that Caleb Williams does, his improvisation, his creativity, I do think I'd probably right now lean towards taking Drake May. I think Drake May is a bit more polished as a passer. He's not as creative in his game. He's not as improvisational, I guess is the word. And I think that is a real strength that Caleb Williams has. But I do think that the effectiveness of that is limited against the better defenses he's played. And I think he's really struggled against the better defensive fronts he's played during his college career. Struggled against UCLA this year, struggled against Utah, twice last year and kind of this year too. Wasn't good against Notre Dame. So I have concerns. I think Caleb Williams has the potential to be a really good NFL quarterback and a really special one. If he hits his ceiling is insanely high. But I think he's got a pretty significant learning curve too at the next level, which is why if I'm drafting someone who I need to start, 17 games as a rookie, I don't know if that's Caleb Williams. I think it might be Drake May.
You're going to give Bears fans some PTSD remembering Mitchell Trubisky.
Yeah, I know Bears fans don't want to draft a North Carolina quarterback. I understand that that's a hard sell, but
it is a hard sell. So if you were going to sell them on a pick that's not Caleb Williams, you might have a better chance saying Marvin Harrison Jr., who I absolutely would take number one overall if I was the Bears. But if you're looking at who you need to take, you probably need a quarterback. Especially if there's a new head coach. Well, hey, it might be Jim Harbaugh. You never know. We've heard some whispers. So it'll be really interesting. We're not going to agree, but I think we both agree that neither one of us would be shocked with any of the three names that we just threw out going number one overall. But hey, let's talk a little basketball real quick before we get out of here, Tyler. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a handful of undefeated teams still going on. 9 games in, 10 games in, depending on how played so far. But for you, who's the best undefeated team in college basketball right now?
Yeah, it's a little bit tough to say, and it's kind of a cop-out answer because they're the number one team in the country, but I think it's Arizona. I think I feel comfortable saying right now that it's Arizona. You look at their resume, they've got a couple quad one wins, and they're really impressive quad one wins, I think. They went and beat Duke on the road at Cameron Indoor. That's never an easy thing to do. And they have a dominating home win against a top 20 net Wisconsin team at home. So, I mean, those are really nice. They have the number one ranking in the net as well. A big game coming up this weekend. They got Purdue on Saturday, so that's obviously a huge test. If they win that game, I think it pretty definitively the top undefeated team. But right now, I'd say they have the best resume. Another team that I'd say kind of was a tough one to exclude was Baylor, who doesn't quite have the same schedule. Their schedule's been definitely easier on the whole, but they do have a couple pretty nice SEC wins against Auburn and Florida. So I think that's another team I would be maybe putting up in that mix.
I'm going to stick in the Big 12 because I'm a Big 12 homer and go with Houston. Number one team in the Ken Palm, if you look at those rankings, adjusted numbers plus 31.5. They got the number 18 offense, the number 1 defense. They're tough to score on. You like what LJ Cryer is doing. Houston, and not surprising that they're probably going to be in contention for the Big 12 championship, along with Baylor, along with Kansas. There's plenty of 12 teams that are going to be up there. But for me right now, I'm going to Houston. I think just look at what they can do defensively, slow some teams down. They have enough offensively to put teams away as well. So for me, Houston right now 10-0, but I don't think you could go wrong with your pick, with the number 1 overall pick. Love the job that Caleb Love is doing there with the Wildcats. Another team that's going to be in the Big 12 next year, and that's going to be really tough if you look at some of these teams that are going to be coming in. All right, let's talk about the shocking teams. I'm going to kick this off real quick. How about Ole Miss? Not surprising. I'm a guy. I know exactly what Chris Beard can do, but I think it's a little bit shocking just how much has changed. Where Ole Miss is this year, the Rebels are 9-0 through 9 games. Remember, this is a team that only won 12 games last year. So when I look at, we knew the impact would be immediate. I don't know that we knew undefeated immediate, and we'll see as they get into SEC play and if they can keep that momentum going. But for me right now, they're the shocking team of the year.
Yeah, I mean, the instant impact Chris Beard has had is pretty undeniable. I don't want to say it's like a fake 9-0 because it's not, but it hasn't. It's been a pretty friendly non-conference schedule for Ole Miss. But a couple nice wins in there. They beat Memphis and they beat NC State. Yeah, they beat NC State and Memphis. So I mean, look, I don't think anyone doubts Chris Beard's aptitude as a basketball coach. I mean, he's no longer the coach at Texas, not for basketball reasons, and we won't really get into the details of that here, but. I mean, say what you will about that hire, but I don't think anyone doubted that he would come in and raise the floor and the ceiling at Ole Miss. And it seems that he's done that in short order. So, just once again, just a really strong collection of head coaches in the SEC.
We will see. First big test. If we're talking about like major test, January 6th in Knoxville against the number 12. That's going to be a huge test for him. And then obviously they will play your Florida Gators less than a week later. So they're as they get into the thick of it, we'll find out real quick for them. But for you're going to ACC to a state that I know you spent a lot of time in. So go ahead and tell us how your hometown Clemson Tigers look.
Yeah, everyone talks about Clemson football. After an 8-4 season, can we talk about some Clemson basketball? Because I mean, this team is. First of all, it's off to its best start in 15 years, and they're 9-0. And again, it's not like that is absolutely not a fake 9-0. They've played an actually really hard schedule. They've gone on the road and beat Alabama and Pitt. They have a home win against a good South Carolina team. They lead the ACC in net ranking. They're number 13 in the polls. Like, this team has been like legitimately very, very good. And it came out of nowhere. I mean, Brad Brownell is a coach that has been there for a while, made a couple of tournament appearances, had a lot of underachieving. I think he's a guy that, sort of is like on the perpetual hot seat. Like, I feel like every year it's like, is this the year they're going to finally get fed up with Brad Brownell? I think this was a really important year for him. And so far they've come in and they're playing really good basketball. Their center, PJ Hall, he's averaging 20-7, been really good. One of the better players in the ACC right now. I think it's kind of a down year in the ACC. Duke's got 3 losses, I believe. So does North Carolina. Virginia's pretty good, but we don't really know yet. Point being, like, this might be the best team in the ACC this year. So really curious how they finish out, play down the stretch. We'll see, how they look once we get into conference play. But for now, this is, I think, been one of the biggest surprises in the entire country, and it's a really intriguing team.
Yeah, let's not forget they also beat a pesky TCU team
on
the road. They're a team that kind of shows up. And yeah, PJ Hall's been great. Joseph Girard, Chase Hunter, all averaging 10 or more points this year, doing a really good job. I mean, you have to like with the way that they're playing. And let's not forget who had the 3rd best record in the ACC last year. So I really think they peaked the year early, but now we're seeing it. And hats off to the athletic department of Erickson, because I felt like Brownell should have been fired 2 years ago, and now they're kind of, it's paying off for them when you look at how they're playing. Their strength of schedule is among the top in college basketball. Their strength of record is among the top 20 or top 30 teams. So it's not they're getting those cheap wins, and you rattled off some of the teams that they beat, which just shows you the great job that Brownell's doing. They're going to get tested too. Coming up in the coming. Is they got North Carolina that they're going to have to play. I believe they also have to play Miami coming up. So we'll find out how good they are, and as the season rolls on. But that's going to do it for this edition of the College 12 Pack. Tyler and myself will be back next week as we talk a little bit more college basketball as we're starting to get into the thick of it with the holiday season coming up. We know conference play is right around the corner, which means conference tournaments are around the corner. March Madness, not too far behind that. Plenty to get into. But for Tyler, I'm Patrick. See you next week.